Hello everyone, welcome to this video, which is the first video in this series talking about coding. So to me, nowadays, everything is being digitalized and it's a widely applicable skill to know coding and to apply this coding skill to everything, almost everything in our life. So to me, coding is so essential because it provides us a bridge, a kind of way to communicate with the computer and giving orders to the computer so that it does what we ask it to do and assist our life. So ranging from those language models that advise you how to write, how to brainstorm good ideas like ChatGPT, ranging from that to physical robots and mechanics of things, not only in like healthcare, but also in everyday life. It's developing. So my idea is coding skill is so essential, and it's a industry that is currently developing and producing even more job opportunities in the future. And it's also just cool that you know how to communicate with computer and maybe develop some software or some tools that can help us. So it's like being a wizard who can have those magical whisper, those magic lines, so that the computer can do its magic and help us. As long as you know how to speak the language it understands, which is coding. It includes many language. So that's the confusing part. Maybe in this slide you can see there's a bunch of different languages, but it's all called coding. So for beginners like me, I'm also consider myself still beginning and learning. It could be frustrating of knowing that there are so many different languages we need to learn to perform. Each have its own pros and cons and suitable for specific tasks. For example, PHP, CSS might be good for website development. C++, JavaScript might be like quicker and faster, and that's essential for software to efficiently perform. So while what we are going to be focusing on and using is a more widely and maybe easier for the beginners to learn, which is just Python, not showing in this picture, but the idea is once you know one of the language, it's much easier for you to kind of transform the ability and skills to learn another language. And it depends on your future job opportunity, which type of specific requirement or software it asks you to learn. But we're going to focusing on the basics using Python. And the idea is becoming a wizard, becoming this computer whisper sounds very cool, but it's not a easy task, and I'm here with you. So that's why I'm making this video and kind of motivate myself and also you to expose ourselves to more of those challenges, and practice makes perfect. Just expose yourself to all the different variety of challenges and tasks might help us to master this skill. Well, as I said, it's very confusing. There are so many languages, first of all. Secondly, the challenges is not going to be easy. So we're going to tackle one task at a time, one by one in each video. Well, so let's tackle one of our first challenge in this video. This is our challenge today. Given the input of string that containing just the following characters, so different kind of symbols, either it's parentheses or brackets or brackets. And then we want to determine if those input, which is a combination of different character of the different symbols, whether they are valid, defining by the opening symbol has to be closed by the same type of symbol in the correct order. For example, the first three pairs, they opened with the parentheses and closed with the same type, and the same for the following two pairs. This is a valid input. However, the second example is not valid because the second pair does not have a match in terms of the opening and closing symbols. So let's see the specific Python code to make this work. We are going to create several functions to solve this challenge. Okay, so I also pasted the challenge instructions here in order for you to kind of reference back. Let's begin the solution. So at first, if you don't know what is object-oriented programming, you may look it up later after this video, but I do mention about this because this whole solution is wrapped in a class. The class is called a solution. This function, the purpose is to evaluate whether a string is valid or not. And what we're going to define below is the way to evaluate whether this string is valid or not. And the return value, which is at the end of this method, after we call this function, this is valid method, to an instance of this class. The instance is represented by self here as the first parameter in this method. When you call this method of this instance, which is the instance of this class, you're going to get a Boolean value as the output. So true for a valid string that has the corresponding rightly ordered brackets. False is if you're putting it wrong in the wrong order or you're not closing it. So that's the first two lines is really the object-oriented programming stuff. And it's an example of how to define a class, including a specific method called isValid. It's already defined there. So S, we named S as a kind of variable name, and it is a string. So if our S has a length of a odd number, so it's definitely going to be false because there must be a leftover without a match. By that, I mean, you might have something like this. I mean, maybe this one. Everything just matches in the others might match, but there's one left over. So nothing can be matched with it. So there is a leftover and there won't be a perfect match for each of the brackets in the string. So it would be false. So that's an easy case. So we covered the case of not having even number. And the second one is if we do have an even number and we then need to define a pair of closing and opening brackets. So we name this variable, which is actually a dictionary. It's a key value pair. If you don't know what is a dictionary and you're confused about when I'm saying key value pair, there are a bunch of other Python basic and data structure videos there to explain what is a dictionary in Python. And another data structure here is called stack. So that's another data structure you might need to look up. So those two kind of blocks of codes are just setting up what we want to search for, like what are the key, what are the value, what are the corresponding ones, so that each of them can be searched and matched. While the other one is essentially what we store data to. So let's begin the kind of searching process. We can start one by one within this string, each character, starting from the first character. So for each character in the string, we're going to focus on the first for now, but it's actually a for loop that loops through each of the characters in the string. So for example, this one, if your string equals to this string, the first character would be this bracket that is round, and the second is a curly one, and the last is a square. So let's take this as an example, actually. So if the character is a closing bracket, which is actually not the case, right? In the our first one is an opening bracket. So we actually need to jump. The explanation is here. So if the character is an opening bracket, we don't have anything to look for, because the right order is we need to spot the closing bracket to look for its match. So if we're just seeing some opening bracket, we just append it. So you're going to append this first opening bracket and the second one, because it's a for loop. Once you're done with the first, you're going to start the second. And the second one, you still don't have a closing bracket, and that's why you're going to do this again in this else condition. And then the third one, finally, you got something you can work on. Only when you have a closing bracket, this would be true, which is closing bracket would be a key. The previous example we used, we already appended two bracket in it, but so that won't make it a empty stack. So when stack is empty, it returns false. So it's not true. It does not contain anything in it. So if not false, if not empty, then it becomes true. So this first kind of condition is just saying if stack is empty, it will be true. It will proceed and execute the next code line, which is just return false. It definitely would be invalid if you start any string with a closing bracket. And then the second part of the condition here is a or. So either this true or the second is true. We're going to say it's invalid. We're going to say it's false. So the second part says this is the last element. We're kind of extracting the last element in this stack. And this means does not equal. So it's not matching. And this is another indexing, but in terms of a dictionary. So remember, a dictionary is defined by a key value pair, and the pairs, when you give it the key, it returns the value to you. So for example, if we are looking at the original example, the first example we talked about here, two of those are saved, and then we're looking at this square closing bracket. And now it's not empty because we already have the two saved there. While now the character becomes the for loop. It's the third for loop here, because the first two we already went over. So the third one is a closing square bracket. So the CH equals to a closing square bracket. And then we look back to this pairs dictionary, and we found that this key, the value for this key is a opening bracket, is a opening square bracket. So this actually, the whole thing equals to this. And then the last element in this stack, remember, it's our latest saved. So immediately before this for loop, the second one is a curly one. So it does not match. So this actually, and it is a not equal, then it's an or statement. And when any of those are true, any of the two conditions are true, we execute this next code, which is just return false, meaning that this example is not a valid one. Okay, so let's make another example of a maybe valid, let's see, just a simple example like this. So the first one, like we said, will be appended and saved to this stack, and it would be the latest the last element in this stack. And in this case, when we encounter the second loop, it's a curly bracket, closing bracket with a curly shape. And then we look up in this dictionary and we see, it's an opening bracket with a curved shape, and it does match. So this actually matches with each other. So this does not fulfill this condition. So if we do not fulfill this condition, we need to go to the same kind of indented level code. So this one is stack.pop. Remove the last element from the stack because we're not concerning about it anymore. It actually fulfill our validity test. We do not need to worry about this anymore. We can proceed to the next one and compare the next pair of brackets. And that's why it uses this pop method to pop out, to kind of remove this element from the stack. And lastly, we come to this, which is if the stack is empty, let's say we popped out all the matched element from the stack, it becomes empty in the end. So if the stack is empty, the bracket are valid because we popped out all the matched pairs of the bracket, because if the stack is empty, it returns true, indicating we have valid bracket pairs. So once you execute this, the final step is just to test whether this is a actually working function. So this is, again, object-oriented programming here again. Because we only created a class called solution, we need to create an instance of the solution class. So for our convenience, I'm going to just name it instance. And then remember, the whole codes here are just defining this is valid method. So we're going to use this is valid method using this dot to connect the instance with this method. And we're going to put our kind of testing string within here. So once I click this, which is just executing this whole code chunk, we can see the first one is false, it's invalid, while the second one is true. So you can give yourself more examples to test, but here we can probably conclude that we have the right code and it's working. It's helping us to evaluating whether a string is valid or not. So we completed this challenge. It's telling us and kind of teaching us to use a stack, for example, to use dictionary for another example. Those are a very useful way to search for a match or not kind of task. Let's quickly review what we've done in solving this challenge of matching different symbols. So we first define a method, and the input is a string called s. We evaluate the length of the string to make sure it's an even number. And then we define a dictionary, like a helper, for our next few steps, which is basically relying on a list that we call a stack and loop through the characters in the input by different conditions. So specifically using this list pop and append methods to do that. And we evaluated that it's correct. It's evaluating whether the input is valid or not based on if the symbols correspond with each other, the opening and closing one. What we're going to do is to introduce a second approach to solve the same challenge. So this time we call the method is matched, and the input is still a string and we name it symbols. So it's still a Boolean output that we will return as a result for this method. So instead of using a dictionary that we used in the first approach, the first method, we use predefined string here. So lefty means the opening symbols, and righty are the closing symbols, and they are actually in the same corresponding order. So it's the same position. For example, position 0 in lefty correspond to the first, the position index 0 element in righty. So those two predefined string, we save those symbols in it in the corresponding order. And then similar to approach 1, we create a list called S. And similarly, S actually stands for stack, because this stack is a data structure that has this unique feature of last in, first out. So we are really concerning about the last element saved. So we're going to just name it S. While S, like stack and list, share a very similar method. So for our convenience, we can just use list here and use append instead of push. So push is a specific method, works for stack, but here, because we actually used a list, we will use append when we are adding different elements. So let's continue. So we set up a few different, either it's those helper strings, or we initialized this stack. So for the input, for every component in the symbols, so it could be those, it could be a combination of those two. So for anything that's in the input, we want to loop them in this for loop. So for the first component in the symbols, if this component is an opening symbol, anything in this lefty string, we will append it into this S. We will append the first one. For example, if we are in our first loop, we append it if it is a opening string. So let's use an example. So the first one is a opening, so we're going to append. However, if the first one is actually a closing one, it's a closing symbol, we will skip this if, because it does not match the condition of being a lefty, being an opening symbol. We will go to this else if, and then find that this symbol, this first loop, we actually need to put this component into this else if condition because it's in the righty. So after we decide that we need to go to this condition, we continue within this else if condition and see that we need to evaluate if S is empty. So if S is empty, so S is empty, then S would be false. So not false would mean true. So if this is true, so if S is empty, we will return false because there is no lefty component, because we're currently looking at a empty stack, a empty list that this component, which is a closing symbol, we actually don't have any thing to pair with this closing one. So directly, it will be false. It will not be a valid input to evaluate. However, let's remove this invalid string and make it a valid one. We will, and do this all over again, we will see the first one is a opening symbol and it will get appended in this list. So now the S is not empty, so we will continue to this if condition after we saved this, saved the first component in S. Let's make this smaller so that it's easier to see all of those in reference to the example. So the first one, we appended it into the stack, and then that's we finished this if here. And then we do not need to go to this else if because one of the condition we already run. We do not need to go to the else condition. So we directly continue the loop because this is a for loop. We need to go through all the components in the input. So the first one, the first loop we've done, and that led us to a stack, a S sequence with one component in it, which is a opening parenthesis. And then we go to the next component, which is another open parenthesis. We will go through the same step because it's in the lefty and we're going to append it, and we're done with this for loop, the second one, because the first if condition is finished and we do not need to go to the else if, because the else if is only when the if condition is not met. So we're now at the third kind of symbol here. So the same process went through because it's an opening symbol, and we will append them all in the stack. And the fourth loop, we will evaluate that it's not in the lefty, it's not an opening, it's an ending. So it's in this else if condition. So it's in the righty, and the stack is not empty because we already have 3 opening symbols in it. So we won't run this because the condition does not meet. So we will be in this next line, which will evaluate whether the lefty, the most recent lefty component, whether it equals to or actually does not equal to the one we're currently looking at. So let's walk you through the components within this one line of code in more detail. So this S pop only pop out the last item that we just appended in, so, which would be this one. So currently we are looking at this closing, and one step before it that's already in the S, that's already in the stack, appended in the stack, is this opening curly symbol. So for that one, the index of this symbol is here. So it would be in the lefty, and the index is 1. Remember, Python is 0 indexed. So the first component is 0, and the second one is 1. So the whole line of code on the left actually will return 1. And then on the right, the component, we're actually looking at the fourth loop. And this, the fourth component here is this curly closing symbol here, while it corresponds to an index of 1 as well, because they are actually corresponding with each other and they match. So so this actually is not the condition. They actually equals to each other. So we're going to skip this and go to the next for loop, the next loop. So remember, when we conduct a pop method to any stack, the component actually popped out. So now in the S, we actually only have 2 components. that's saved previously. Because due to the most recent implementation, we popped out this one, and we did find a match. So we did not return false because the two index actually equals to each other. So without returning a false, we continue our loop. So the next loop, remember we finished the loop with this closing curly symbol. So the next one is this parenthesis, the closing parenthesis. So very similar to what we've done for this curly symbol, we will again compare it with this most recent, like the last remaining component in the S, which is indexed 0, and it's the same with the current the current component we're looking at, which is actually also the 0 in this righty. So they're not mismatched, and we don't need to return false, and we continue to the next one. The next one, luckily, is our last component to focus on, and it's a square, it's a bracket. And then for that one, we go back and remember the stack, we popped out this matched parenthesis. So the only component that's left right now is actually only one component in this stack, and that is a parenthesis. So when we want to go through the last loop with this closing bracket, we find that it's in the righty without a empty. So we again is here to evaluate if the index are the same. So the S component will pop up the last one, which actually is the only component left, which is the opening parenthesis, and the index in the lefty string is actually 0. However, the last component in this last loop we're focusing on is actually a bracket, which has an index of 2. So this one does not match with each other. So 0 does not equals to 2. And they are mismatched, and that's why we need to return a false here. So we went through all the component, and however, actually, we need to stop and return a false here. However, if you do have if your input is actually like this, the last one actually matches with what's left as the last component in the stack, we actually went through all the component, and it will return a true because now the stack is empty. Because after this step, the parenthesis, the only thing left in this S would be pop out. So S would be empty once everything find a match. So if we find a match, if the last component is actually a closing parenthesis that actually equals to each other because they have the same index in the predefined lefty and righty string, we actually find a match that they actually does not need to return this false, and we can proceed to this last line of code in this case for this specific example, which is a valid one, which each component actually matches with each other. So this one, again, is very similar to the one we're evaluating here. So when S is empty, S is going to return a false, and not false would be true. So we're going to return a true here when S is empty. So S will be empty if everything just popped out. So nothing is left if everything popped out, and we don't need to return a false because everything matched, like the index with the righty component actually correspond to each other. So we can evaluate it by running this line of code and then call a instance of the solution. So remember, we defined this method within a class, and we need to create a instance of this class. So we do that first. And then we evaluate those two. The first one is false. It does not match. The second one, let's see, is true. Let's evaluate if the example we talked about actually matches our prediction. So let's put this into this and make another example as the kind of first example we talked about. So how about this? So it returns false as predicted, and then this returns true. So the algorithm actually performed as we expected. And as a kind of note, it actually runs O, big O, n times, depending on the number of input that the algorithm needs to evaluate. Let me bring us to this conclusion page. Like I said before, if you are a beginner and not familiar with a lot of the functions or data structure I mentioned, you may need to watch more tutorials there. For example, object-oriented programming, for example, the if-else and the for loops, and also the stack, the different method of a list, either it's pop or append, and what is a stack, also a dictionary, what is a dictionary. So those are data structure and also like loops, those recursive kind of thing, and object-oriented programming, and also Python in general. You might need to read more or watch more about that to fully understand the code I'm providing and presenting today. I need to let you know that this is kind of hopefully a guide for you, and it tries to demystify and trying to motivate you to master this kind of whispering, communicating with computer, those kind of skills. And once we practice more, we might gradually tackling those challenges and developing our coding skills. The challenges that I'm going to share in the future videos, I believe, will also be coming from Leetcode. So please give a thumb up or subscribe, because we're going to learn more about this. Remember, practice makes perfect. And if you are watching more tutorials like this, you're going to be a wizard, or very soon a whisper, a computer whisperer who can communicate with the program, with the computer, and assist yourself to do some tasks using computer language. And we're going to start with Python here. This is the code zone for everyone, especially for beginner. I am myself a beginner, and I'm going to make my goal is to make this as accessible as possible, and to motivate myself and all of you to fold a community, and feel free to drop comments and share any other resources that you find useful here. So stay tuned for our next coding challenge. Thank you.